Welcome back to the Book and Life podcast, and we're continuing our theme of crime with the most gorgeous writer whose true beauty really shines in her words and keeps me up till 4 a.m. reading. And yes, my hubby does complain. So we're going to be talking with her in a quick minute, but before we do that, I want to remind you to check out The Time Guardians, The Shadow, Book 4 by Marianne Curley. Now let's get into it with Fiona Cummins. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me, Crystal.
It's a pleasure. I mean, I was so excited when your agent said yes. I was like, woohoo! And I literally told my husband, I'm like, I got the best person on the podcast. And he's like, who? And I'm like, Fiona Cummins. And he went, oh, the bone shaker person? And I was like, yeah, her. So yeah, he heard about that book like non-stop. I never stopped talking about it. So he felt like he had read it too. And I did it with this one. I'm like, God damn it, I can't figure out who's lying.
Well, thank you. It was always really nice to feel that your books are met with an enthusiastic audience.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with yours is there's such an enthusiasm behind the pacing. You can almost feel the beauty and the thought and the consideration that you've put into it. I did have moments where I thought, is she going to connect this back to that guy in The Bone Collector? And I was like sitting, waiting, kind of with the way that Saul's dark and twisted. I'm like, oh, is that going to be a hook? And I was hanging on to that the entire way. But I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about Into the Dark so that I don't, give spoilers.
Okay, well, Into the Dark is my fifth novel. And it came out on the 14th of April, and it tells the story of Julianne Hillier and Piper Holden, who have been best friends for almost 15 years. And every week they run together. And one Tuesday morning, Julianne gets up and she jogs down to Sea Wings, which is where Piper lives, a beautiful Art Deco home in the affluent town of Midtown-on-Sea. And when she gets there, she discovers that the kettle is still warm, the mobile phones are still charging on the worktop, the cars are in the drive, but the entire Holden family, that's Piper, her husband Gray, and their teenage children, Reva and Artie, have vanished off the face of the earth. And the story basically unfolds, unravels exactly what has happened to them in the preceding days. Investigating their disappearance is an old friend. Readers who have read my earlier books might recognise him. This acts as a standalone. Into the Dark, by the way, it is the first in a series. But the detective, Saul Anguish, DC Saul Anguish, was in fact a teenage boy who was groomed by a serial killer in one of my earlier novels, The Collector.
And the reason I do that.
Yeah. Well, the reason I kind of made him a detective was I really loved the character of Saul. And the reason I love him is because he's so morally ambiguous. And that's the thing that always fascinates me, kind of that ambiguity in people. And a bookseller, a Waterstones bookseller, Fiona Sharp, who I was visiting one day in her shop, said to me, I'd love to see Saul as a detective. And
so did I, actually. Yeah. I was on that train too. I was like, oh,
really? Well, that kindled a fire in me, and I could not let go of that idea. And so I came back to that. And that's, that's the sort of the genesis of DC Saul Anguish, who I love writing, because actually, all of us really, we're all shades of grey, aren't we? And I find that fascinating about people, that we don't, we're neither wholly good or wholly bad, but somewhere in between.
I just loved him because he never gave up. He always had that, I'm not going to lose this fight. Like, that's what I loved about him. And you see that kind of in the way that he fights his darkness through the book. And I thought, that's so well done. So well done. That I was just in awe.
Yeah, and Saul he is a troubled young man. He had a very difficult upbringing, and even now he fights between the goodness in him and the darkness in him. And I think that kind of perpetual struggle makes him a very interesting character, or at least I hope so, and very interesting to write as well, because actually he sometimes does the wrong thing, and yet what I hope is that I want the reader to root for him while he's doing it.
Well, I did. I rooted for him the entire time.
Oh, well, that's good. Thank you.
I was
That's
like,
brilliant to hear.
so go. In fact, at one point, I said it a little bit out loud, like I was thinking it, but I ended up saying it and waking up Ian, and Ian's like, go to sleep. I'm like, I can't. So,
brilliant.
Yeah, no, I loved it. And I've loved all your books so far. And I was saying that, if I get an author who I love dearly, I just buy every one of her books that comes out, or every one of his books that come out. So my hobby's like, Crystal, if we get any more books, we are going to be officially a public library. I'm like, but that's the good thing.
But that is what every author wants to hear, because actually what you want is for readers to know that they love your writing and style, and actually that they don't even really need to check the synopsis. They just think, oh, Fiona's got a new book coming out. I've loved her previous stuff. I'm just going to buy it on faith. And that is what I'm always so conscious about with every book that I'm writing. I want to give it everything, because, readers owe authors nothing, and you're paying your hard-earned cash, and whether it's 99p for a Kindle book that's on offer, or whether it's $14.99 for a signed Waterstones hardback, the point is it's still your money, and you deserve to have a book that you love for the money that you're spending.
I mean, I know that that's the way that I thought when I was writing. I was publishing a twin novel, basically the same kind of, I used the same pacing as you. So it was almost like I loved to see that in somebody else, because every editor I had until your book started coming out complained about my pacing and said, oh, you're going too fast, you're going too fast, you're going too fast. But as I was explaining to them, if I didn't continue that hard pace with them too, the book would just become unreadable. It wouldn't be true to what they're like. These two never stop moving. So in a way, the book can't ever stop moving. And I wrote 5 of them, and I same experience you did. I was in a Waterstones, I'd done a book signing, and the book woman came up to me and she goes, I am so glad you did not write that as a slow burn romance, because it made it enjoyable. It made it exciting. I had a huge plot hole that, because one of my friends who's super smart pointed out after it was published.
Okay, yikes.
And I was like, dude, really? Like, come on. And he's like, yeah, it's like the size of a truck. You could. And I was like, none of the readers picked it up. None of the reviewers picked it up. And I was like, thank goodness nobody noticed it except him. But yeah, like, part of me, like, when I'm writing that series, I have to keep him in the back of my head, because I'm like, if he spots more, he's just gonna say it, and I'm gonna be mortified. So yeah, that's why I love your pacing and really enjoy your novels because of that. So getting into the conversation about books, what is the book that you've read recently that stuck with you the most, if you've had time?
Oh, well, I mean, can I have 2? Because, I mean, if we're talking sort of in fairly recent history, I absolutely fell in love with We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. Okay. And I read an early version of that. It was maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, but it just was the most kind of phenomenal writing, the phenomenal characterization. I just kind of fell in love with that. And I also loved The Familiar Dark by Amy Engel. I don't know if you've come across that. And it's
I've heard it in passing. I must admit, I have heard it in passing.
Yeah, and it's about a mother who is her daughter's been murdered, and she's trying to basically unpick what happened. Both of those are, such kind of compelling, heartbreaking stories, beautifully written. And the book that I'm currently reading at the moment it's a an arc, and it's Claire McIntosh's new
Oh,
police procedural. It's the first in a series. It's called The Last Party. I think it's out in August, I think, or September, and
sounds
it
good.
features a feisty female detective who is, and it's set in Wales. So yeah, and I've just started that, so I'm enjoying that very much.
I love the settings in Wales because sometimes the like I mean I've seen pictures of it. I've never been to Wales, but I know the beauty of it and the way that the people are is just so adoring. So that one I can imagine is going to be a really gripping, really good one.
Yeah, it's good so far. So
So if you had time to just sit and enjoy something, like enjoy an author or a series, what would you pick and what would you read?
oh, I don't know. I mean, I think I would just, rather than a specific author, I think what I would say is that I wish I just had time to read more,
Yeah.
more of everything. I don't know whether it was the same for you. For me, I found reading really difficult during lockdown. I couldn't
I
concentrate.
struggled too, yeah.
Um, and I went back to lots of kind of old favourites, actually.
Mhm.
Sometimes things from my childhood, like I reread Anne of Green Gables, and I picked up some of the kind of old Stephen King books that I had read and
Yeah.
loved, as a much younger person. And I mean, so I think just in general, my life is, it can feel really busy at times. I have
Yeah.
two children. I write full time. I have events in the diary, promotions, and if I'm not promoting stuff, I'm writing. And life is busy, and
Mhm.
I think that sometimes I wish I could just kind of stop and just read as I used to when I was younger. I look at
Yeah.
my 12-year-old who is a voracious reader, and she's
Mhm.
always sort of curled up somewhere, kind of reading, and I'm
Yep.
quite envious of that. I'm like, why do I have to do the washing and like organise what we're going to have for tea? I just want to lay in the garden and read my book.
Oh yeah, I
But
know
yeah, I
that
think
feeling.
that
Yeah. I mean, I
yeah,
personally, because of my dyslexia, I have to read every day. So I make a point, I don't care how late it is at night, I will sit and I read 20 pages of whatever. And of
okay.
course, me being, the way that I am, I decided to start my BA honors degree the year that we went into lockdown. So I was like, yeah, this is not very smart, Crystal. And now I'm in my second year, and
What
it's
are you
been a rough ride.
studying?
I'm actually doing an open degree so that I can
Okay.
do. I didn't want to just do creative writing or English literature. I wanted to mix it up, and I wanted to be able to explore things and do different things. Much to their dismay, to be honest. But I've only got I think 2 years left, and I have to get a dyslexia test, which I've never done.
Okay.
But my school always said you're dyslexic, and I knew I was dyslexic. But that'll be interesting because I've never done one of those before. I'll
Okay.
be sitting there on a knife's edge going. But no, it's I couldn't read in lockdown either, and I ended up picking up Rachel Kane's Better Falls series, and sadly she's passed away. One of my first ever really kind of amazing writers. She was adult, she was young adult, and then all of a sudden she did this crime series, and it totally took me out of left field. I was like, wait, you normally do vampires and love and romance. Wait, why have we got a crime novel now? I'm so confused. But it was good because I saw a totally different side to her writing, and she was using her cancer diagnosis and the darkness of that to feed into her series. And I was actually going to recommend that one to you because it is so amazing.
Okay.
And it is totally one that you can curl up in the bath with and you can read, and it just goes by so fast. But you enjoy every minute that you're in there. And again, she uses a very similar pacing to you, but it's so layered and complicated that it makes it a great read. So that's the one that's kind of stuck with me, and I ended up reading the entire series in lockdown because I was like, gotta do something, and I was also teaching at the time, so I was like, ah. Is there an author, past and present, who's influenced, inspired, and made you excited about books?
Yeah, I mean, I think I read from a very young age. My mum, um, my dad doesn't read at all, and because he can't, we think he's dyslexic too,
Yeah,
but he's never been formally kind of diagnosed as such. But so he was kind of less into books and learning and things. But my mum always encouraged us to read,
yeah,
and in fact, as children, I remember, in the holidays, we would always go to the library, and
same.
and
Yep.
I remember that you used to be able to get 4 books, and then it was 8 books, and then it was 12 books or something.
Yep.
And my
And then
brother
you
and
feel
I, we
compelled to
always,
read them. Yeah.
yeah, we used to get this huge stack. And I think so. I read widely from quite a young age, and my reading wasn't censored at all. And so I kind of, the books I grew up on were Agatha Christie thrillers,
Yeah.
Stephen King's the books of Stephen King, and then I kind of progressed to writers like Angela Carter, Jeanette Winterson, and then kind of latterly into sort of Val McDermid, Ian Rankin, in the kind of crime series.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and there's so much choice out there, isn't there? There's so many kind of
Fantastic
books to
writers.
read.
Yeah.
And I read everything that I could lay my hands on, really. But I would say, the ones that I've just kind of mentioned are the ones that made the most profound impression on me, I think.
Did you
Um,
never
you know,
discover Catherine Cookson in your journey?
well, my mum read a lot of Catherine Cookson and my
Ah,
nan, and I remember the kind of front covers.
yeah.
And I did, and I also went through a phase, and I can't remember who the authors were, but they were the was it Lena Kennedy? Was that her name? And it was often it was like an oval picture of a woman, and it
Yeah.
would just be a single name as the name of the story. I read loads of those. I read the Sweet Valley High books. Do you remember those?
Yes,
I don't know
I
if you read any
do.
of those. And I read a lot of kind of. I used to spend my book tokens on like horror, so like whatever kind of suitably horror, and I can't remember what they were called, like dark. I can't remember.
Dark fiction,
But
wasn't it, back in the day?
there was like an imprint, and it was a
Mm-hmm.
particular kind of book, and it was, I remember, like ones about poltergeists or
Yeah.
kind of scary, like lots of scary things. So kind of a real sort of mishmash. And then as I got older, and I was kind of exposed to much more kind of classic fiction, I
Yeah.
suppose, and things like Austen and Bronte and all of that kind of stuff, Hardy. And so I read those too, and I did English at university.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I loved so much about reading was that I lived in kind of, a small town in Essex.
Mm-hmm.
And what reading does is it takes you to different worlds,
Yeah, it does.
different places, and more importantly, it introduces you to new ideas. Right, so things that I hadn't considered or I didn't know about because they fell outside, what I was being exposed to as a child and a teenager. And so that more than anything is what I love about books and reading.
I'm the same as you. I grew up in Shetland, and if you know where that is, it's like right at the north of Scotland. 16-hour boat journeys just to get to Aberdeen, so it was, I always felt hemmed in. I always felt restless. I was one of those really restless kids. So it would take me a long time to read anything. And what my nan did was, I think my nan realized that I was dyslexic before I did. So every Easter and summer, she would take me and she would make me pick out books. However, she didn't really check the books I was checking out because I ended up with like Mills and Boone, Catherine Cookson. It was like a mix of romance. And then I found Debbie Galore, and I fell in love with her Wicked Dead series. It was so funny. And then Harry Potter arrived, and my mum was like, that was the first time me and my mum ever connected on books. And we read the series. And she was awful. She would buy the book ahead. She would read that book, and I had to wait for her to finish before I could get it. And I'm like sitting there, and she would be trying really hard not to spoil it. And I'd be like, hurry up, oh, mum. So yeah.
But Yeah, I mean, I was allowed to. I mean, my mum hadn't read half the books that I was reading.
Yeah.
But I kind of had the same sort of dilemma with my own children, because my 12-year-old daughter is a very advanced reader,
Yeah.
and so some of the books that she reads. I mean, I bought her the well, I recommended actually that she read the Sarah J. Maas books,
Yeah.
because I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly, but I recommended that someone buy them for her birthday, and then I tweeted about it, and a few people got in touch to say, do you know what these
Yeah.
books, are
I did
like?
the same
So,
thing. I honestly thought it was like a clean young adult series. It doesn't stay that way.
but no, and I read a couple of the chapters. Somebody sent me like a couple of chapter references so I could get a kind of a flavour, and I did think very carefully about it. But in the end, what I decided is that actually children, they self-censor.
Yeah,
so
they do.
if they're uncomfortable with what they're reading, if they're frightened by what they're reading, or if they are unhappy, they put the book down.
Yeah.
And I don't want to dictate what my children read, because frankly I'm just happy that they're reading.
I'm the
and
same.
actually, there is so much that children can access through the internet. You can be the most careful parent in the world with your kind of parental controls, that kind of thing, but they are always able to access all sorts of things, much more extreme things than I ever did when I was a child. And so I think actually if they learn about things through books and through reading, in some ways that's almost a softer introduction to to things like sex and all of that kind of stuff. So I try very hard to let them read what they want, really.
And what I discussed this with my partner because we're starting to have a family this year. And I said to him, I'm not going to lock away the erotica that's in the house. I'm not going to hide Catherine Cookson. I said, because at the end of the day, they're going to find this stuff online. They're going to hear about it in the playground. I worked in a school with 12-year-olds, and I was hearing about them talking about, I might want to sleep with him or her. They maybe didn't understand what they were saying, but it's there. And, these kids are listening to Eminem and they're listening to these rap songs, and it's exposure, and you can't help it. You can't change it. So
I also think you can use it as learning moments, like you saying that you kind of connected with your mum over Harry Potter or whatever. And then, my daughter and I have both, it was quite a long time ago, but I read the Twilight series when it first came out, and she has kind of read that recently. And, so you can say, actually, it's not acceptable to have, if your your partner or whatever was to turn up in your bedroom and watch you while you were sleeping, that would be a big red flag.
Red flag, yeah. Okay. And I would teach that.
So you can, you can use those moments as well. You can say, this is for the storytelling, but actually if that happened in real life, or, someone was following you and you didn't know that they were following you, that is unacceptable.
Yep. That's come to tell mum and dad. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you can use moments in reading too, I think. But yeah,
so I have to ask books, this because you mentioned Twilight. So have you read the last one, Edward?
Well, the one from Edward's point of view.
Yeah.
I haven't. Now, my daughter has got that, but I haven't read it. She's read it, but I haven't.
I read it this year. I was in ICU. And of course, my hubby picked the books. Mental note, I'll make sure to tell him titles to take him to hospital. Because it was, you've seen the size of it. It's huge. And it's a hardback. And I'm trying to balance it in ICU on a pillow. I've got all these lines and tubes and everything going everywhere. And I'm trying to read it. And I'm the only person awake in ICU. And they were trying to get me a little light so I could actually read it. And I was reading it and I was feeling almost like I couldn't follow it very well. Because not because I was sick or the drugs or anything. But I felt like it was so jumping all over the place. It didn't have the same flow as her original Twilight series did.
Well, so I think what happened. I haven't read it, and I think because I read, the original ones when they all came out, but
Yeah.
I think, as what sometimes happens with series, and I don't mean to kind of single
No, no, don't.
Stephanie Meyer out particularly, but I think sometimes what you can do is, something is brilliant as it is, and then when it's, because it's successful, they,
Yeah.
the franchise is extended and extended and extended because they
Mm-hmm.
want to capitalize on the success, when sometimes actually it's better to just keep it, in its original form, I guess.
I
But
think, and I think
good
that
on
was
her.
just supposed to be a trilogy. It didn't.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
didn't feel
And
like it should have gone on longer than it did.
Yeah, and I'm not, I am not sniffy about any kind of fiction, any genre.
No.
I believe that people should read what they enjoy,
Yeah,
and
I totally agree. I
yeah,
must admit, I would love to see like a spin-off with Jacob and like explore the werewolves and to see him find somebody that he loves, almost like he moves on from Bella. I think he should move
yeah,
on from Bella, right?
yeah,
And it would have been nice, like when I heard she was doing something in Twilight series, I was like, oh, please let this be following Jacob, because that would have
mm,
been amazing to have seen that kind of
mm.
series happen. So I must admit,
Well, maybe there's
that's what
still
I hoped
time.
for, and I didn't get it, so I was a bit
She might do it
disappointed.
yet, though. You never know.
Oh no, I know. I really hope she listens to this and goes,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to go write that, because that would be awesome. But yeah, I mean, I was a fan until that last one, but yeah. So what genre do you feel drawn to when you go to a bookshop or if you're looking at books online? Where's the first genre you click on?
I probably am quite drawn to crime
Mm-hmm.
and sort of psychological thriller. Um, but the beauty of the crime genre is that it is so wide, from, cozy crime, really kind of
Mm-hmm.
cozy crime, and to, the really kind of dark, brutal, crime novels.
Yeah.
So, and everything in between. So there is a lot of scope to explore. But I also enjoy contemporary fiction. I like to read the books that there's the huge buzz about and that,
Mm-hmm.
people are talking about and enjoying, because I like to see if I enjoy them too. And I think sometimes, if you read too much crime, sometimes I just need a distraction
Yeah.
from other crime, because what happens, unfortunately, and I don't know if you find this too, is that when you are a writer, an author, is that sometimes you start to unpick how the author is doing what they're doing. And
Yep.
actually what I want to do is just sit there and read a book. I want to be so swept up in
Yep.
the story that I don't even think about the joins, about the characters, about how they're doing what they do. So it's books that can do that. I enjoy some historical fiction and, sort of
So did you do
sweeping
the Outlander
narrative.
series or did you avoid that?
No, I haven't read that. Would you recommend it?
I do recommend it. However, I believe in trigger warnings, if you know what I mean. So
Okay.
in that particular book, there is a rape, and it is very brutally done, and it's
Okay.
carried on into book two.
Okay.
The writing is amazing. She does get a little bit of the Scottish wrong in terms of like Highlanders have a different accent to Lowlanders. So that was my only flaw with it. But I do recommend her because she's easy to read, she's easy to get into, and she was a great distraction for me when I was stuck in contemporary. Like when I
Mm.
was writing Marie's World, I needed that escape, like you said, to go somewhere else and to focus on something else. And that's what I did. And I must admit I enjoyed her. I couldn't watch the series because I knew what was coming at the end, and I'm like, no, I can't do it. So yeah, I recommend her, and Rachel Kane's another good one if you're just like for your daughter if she's wanting a nice
Yeah.
vampire series with physics in it. That's an incredible series, especially with the way that they use physics. She uses physics throughout. And also there's a vampire who has pink vampire bunny slippers, and if he doesn't have his bunny slippers, he freaks out. So there's a lot of humor in it. too. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and sometimes kind of non-fiction can be good too, or
Yep.
listening to podcasts, or just kind of, the distraction from, just being so kind of immersed in crime. And
Yeah.
because what I enjoy about good, or what I consider to be kind of good crime fiction, I like to read books that have distinctive characters, that have or have compelling and interesting plots, because there is an awful lot of fiction that is sort of crime fiction that can be quite samey, if that
Yeah.
makes kind of
No, it
sense.
does.
And
Yeah.
you want something that's a bit different too, I think.
Yeah, and that's how I feel. And I always say, if you want to venture down a twin turning on twin story, there's always mine. Hopefully you don't see the plot hole, but never mind. Has there
No, but now
been?
you've told me about it, I'll be looking for it.
Yeah, well, I was going to offer you a signed copy actually, but has there been a book that you've picked up and you thought to yourself, I should never have picked this up. Why did I pick it up?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Because I do not subscribe to the school of thought that you have to finish a book if you're not enjoying it.
Yeah.
So I would say, and actually, what I tend to do, especially if I'm buying books, ebooks, is that I will read the sample first to
Yeah.
see whether I think I'm going to enjoy it. And I'd say it's about a 50-50 conversion rate. Sometimes I read the sample and think, I'm just not gonna
Bother with this.
I'm not enjoying this. And sometimes I think, God, I have to find out what happens next. And I think no, because I'm very loath to, I don't feel massively comfortable kind of speaking negatively about other people's writing. And I tell you why, because I think we both know the effort that goes into creating a book. And, whether or not it's your cup of tea, I recognise that, someone has taken time and effort and thought and all of their hopes and dreams and ambition and everything.
Passion,
they're all tied,
yeah, yep.
Passion, everything. It's all tied up in their writing, and we're all different. And I do believe as well that, there is room for everyone.
There is readers, there's so many,
yeah, and readers who love fiction, they don't buy just one book, they buy many books.
Yeah.
And so I can't think of any book, because actually what I do is just put it down. I do
that too.
Yeah.
But it's like a question a lot of readers ask me. And I was like, I have to include this in the podcast, because like every time I did a sign-in, they always said to me, is there a book you can't read? And I'm thinking, that's such a weird question to ask me. But
I think, I think if I was, pushed, we're talking about kind of, despite the dark nature of my own crime fiction, if you read my work carefully, you will know that I am, although I deal with dark things, and I do write in quite a descriptive way, I try so hard not to be gratuitous with the way that I do it. I'm not all about kind of, blood and gore and all of that sort of stuff. And I don't, that's not my style. And I probably wouldn't want to read. Like, that's not to say that I wouldn't describe, a crime scene in quite what some people might consider sort of graphic, in a graphic way, but not in a gratuitous way, which is a different thing. And I wouldn't want to, like, I'm uncomfortable reading books that, although the children in my novels often are victims of, some kind of violence, violence or humiliation or some kind of parental abuse, and just kind of like you're talking about trigger warning, so one here, but I don't like reading about child sex abuse, for example. I wouldn't want to read that. I did actually pick up one book, I'm not going to name it, and it talked in quite graphic terms about that, and I just thought, I just don't want to read this. It's not something I would particularly want to write either, to be honest.
I've seen those books. Somebody gave me one and they said, look, it's got child abuse in it, and I said, okay. I have not picked it up. yet. I think I'm almost like, because when I go into like dart writing, I have to find dart material to like get myself there. And I almost don't want to because I'm going to be a mum. So I'm like, I can't read this because it's going to destroy it for me.
I think it definitely changes things. Like in
Yeah,
my previous life, I was a journalist, and I was a
yeah,
showbiz journalist for the latter half of my career. But at the start of it, I was a news journalist
hmm,
covering kind of, very big news stories. And before I had children, when I would read the morning's papers, I would often skim the stories about children.
yeah,
But as soon as I had children, I would start reading them, and they would just make me cry
yeah.
because, or like if I read about, I don't know, some kind of, I don't know, a stabbing where a teenager has died or something like that. It's
Which is
so
so common
relatable
now. It's
now.
so common.
Yeah, it's so relatable now as a parent, and
Yeah.
and it does change your view on things, or it does for me at least.
Yeah, and the thing is, I've got a wonderful husband. He actually came from a very bad area in Glasgow, and he sat one night and he was actually telling me the stories of like the ice cream van wars. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
I have heard of that, yeah.
And I was like blown away that he was this so well put together person after living in the places in the place that the ice cream wars was taking place, being in an area where the police wouldn't even drive through unless they were in full riot
Mm,
gear. And I
mm.
thought, I couldn't imagine living like that, because I grew up in Shetland where we've had maybe 2 murders in 50 years. And it was just shocking for me to hear him say things like, oh, I didn't walk from one council estate to the other because you could get stabbed or you could get chased with a sword. And I thought, okay then, and it was like talking about how they went out in twos. He would only go out with his cousin and things like that. It was so eye-opening for somebody that had lived such a sheltered life when I came to Glasgow as well. And I had this respect for them in a way because it was a tough life that they were living. And I think that's what I took from him and I put in my novels is the toughness. There's always one character that's just really appears tough, but she's so vulnerable inside. And I was saying to him, I'm like, you might, because he read Ian Rankin and adored Ian Rankin, but now he's looking at your books and he's thinking, she's as good, if not better, than Ian. And to me, that was
Oh.
like, I scored. I got him into a series that he loves. And he's such a difficult reader to get interested in things. So I was like, yes.
Oh, well, that is high praise indeed, and and very kind. But
Especially from someone
Ian's the
from
master,
Glasgow.
isn't
Yeah.
he? Yeah, but
I think that's as well, because this is going to be like a global podcast. It almost gives them like little snippets of insight into like the UK, because the amount of times that people say to me, "Are you American or are you Welsh?" And I'm like, "No." So it's kind of also good to sort of say, "Hey, here in Britain we have lots of things going on. You've got crime, we've got problems with now." So it works itself out. We're sharing it if nothing else. So we're going into writing, and I think we've talked a little bit about this already, but how did you go about creating your darker characters and creating those storylines? Was there a method that you used to get into that, or was there like inspiration from your life that you were able to draw? What led you into those darker characters?
I suppose with my first novel, Rattle was my debut,
Yeah,
and I've been working as a journalist on the Daily Mirror, which is a national newspaper here in the UK, and I kind of had enough. But also, a couple of things happened. My brother's wife, my sister-in-law, she was about maybe about 35, 36 at the time. She was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma, which is a type of blood cancer.
yeah,
It was advanced, it was aggressive, and they had a baby who was about 4 weeks old when she was diagnosed.
Yeah.
So that happened. And then within a few weeks of that, I gave birth to my second child. But my son, who was not yet 2 at the time, also became desperately ill, and was, very poorly. And it was just such an awful time. And what it made me do is it pulled me up short,
Mm-hmm.
and it made me think, you know what, nothing in life is promised,
Exactly.
and there are no guarantees, and we owe it to ourselves, if we can, and I appreciate it isn't always possible, but if we can, to do the things that we want to do, and to pursue our passions and the things that interest us. And so, in a highly emotional move, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, I quit my job.
Yep.
I didn't get redundancy, I just left.
Yep.
And I thought, I'm going to have a crack at writing a book, which is what I did.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never written before, like kind of fiction. I mean, I'd thought about it. I mean, I'd written sort of poems and short stories, and I'd always kind of loved writing, but it never occurred to me that I could get paid to write books. I mean, I thought I'll have a go, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I signed up to the Faber Academy's writing a novel course. It's quite expensive. It's a 6-month course.
Well worth it, though.
Yeah, it was. It really, really was. But it was a gamble in that, I was having a go at something that I didn't actually know that I could do. But in the end, it paid off for me. I started Rattle on that course. And at the end of it, one of the great things about it is that your work is collated in an anthology that's sent to agents and editors. And there was a reading day where they came along, and from that, I basically had kind of emails from about 7 agents who were interested in seeing the full manuscript when it was finished.
Yeah.
I had my kind of dream agent who I'd already met kind of in mind. And she was one of the agents who offered representation when I'd finished it.
Yeah.
And then I kind of, so I think, I was drawn at the time. I was going through quite a dark period, I suppose, because of all of the kind of family illness and so much kind of worry. And I think what I did was use my writing, and I still do it now, actually, use my writing as a way to process the things that happen.
And I'm the same way.
I was just going to say, and incidentally, my sister-in-law has been in remission for 10 years, thank God.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing.
And my son made a full recovery. And, but at the time, none of those things were a guarantee. And, I'm grateful. I'm really, so grateful for that. But, what it did do was it turned me, on a different path.
That's the kind of same thing for me, really. I got diagnosed with arthritis at 2.5 years old. And my entire life was hospitals. I didn't know anywhere else. Like, when I went to school, I didn't really understand school because it wasn't where I spent the majority of my life. And that did affect me because I lost so much of my education. Even though we had a teacher in the hospital, you still lost time because they can't send down workbooks continuously. And for me, it was like the arthritis is almost like a shadow figure to me because he's been with me my entire life. And I went through a really bad period where I just couldn't deal with my family. I couldn't deal with life. And I met my husband, and I left Shetland and I moved to Glasgow. And everyone was shocked because they were like, oh my God, she's left. And it was there that I opened myself up to writing, and I wrote for independent publishers, and I wrote with a lot of them before they shut down. And it was honestly, it was like therapy to all the stuff that I saw in hospital, all the darkness and stuff that I had to deal with in hospital. And what I didn't know until I was a lot older was I was actually placed on a cancer ward for my arthritis because they didn't have anywhere else to put me. And I was actually on similar drugs to the cancer kids. And that was extremely difficult because that group of kids I was on rotation with didn't make it. So I was like the last one standing. And the scars from that was what kept me writing, because it was almost like if I keep writing, I can keep them alive in my head. And these are
Yeah,
big parts of who I am and friends and stuff.
and I think that's absolutely true, because I think, for me, certainly when I was writing, Rattle, is that, while you might not be able to control the fate of the people that you love, you can control the fate of the characters on your page. And so that was kind of what writing was for me. And actually, you mentioned before we started recording that you'd read Rattle when you were in hospital, and actually some of Rattle is written at my son's bedside when he was in hospital, and so some of those hospital scenes are taken directly from a hospital environment. But I think most people who write have experienced grief, loss, heartbreak, as well as all the joyous things like, falling in love and, wonderful things happening to you. So, I think coming to writing a bit older for me was better because I had more life experience. And because of that life experience, you're then able to pour more into the books that you write.
And that's what I said to a lot of writers, because Joe is a lot older than me and he was my co-author. And he was kind of like, I'm the type of person that runs to the edge of the cliff, but doesn't quite realize that it's the edge of the cliff in writing. So he was kind of like the person pulling me back going, okay, let's hold on to this bit to the next set in the book. So he was almost like reining me in, which was really good because I wrote that series. I was 21 when I wrote it, and I had been working on that idea since I was about 14. So it was a long, long time coming, and I started it, and it was like almost being able to let go of all that baggage that I had sort of lumped around with me for so long. And I
and it's not
loved
to
that.
say, and it's not to say, because I think there are a lot of very talented young writers or younger writers who are working today. So it's not necessarily about age, but I think, for me, I was so, the job that I was doing was such an intense job that took so much of your time and your attention that I didn't really have anything left over to write, in the evenings. And I really do appreciate it when people say they find it difficult to carve out the time to write. I mean, I do think there are moments, especially if you're in full-time work. I mean, it is possible. It's definitely not impossible, but it's harder.
It is so much
harder if you're working
It's
full-time.
really dedicated. Dedication has to come into it, because I was teaching full-time, and then I got sepsis. And of course, my body didn't realize it had sepsis, so it had walled off this infection. And 4 CT scans later, they find it. And I had to have my jaw joints removed. And then I spent 6 months not being able to eat anything but baby food, which, by the way, is a perfect way to lose weight. I literally went from 58 kilos to 32 in 6 months.
Oh, no.
And I was like, I just kept writing. I never sent that stuff out. I had let maybe like 1 or 2 people read it. But what kept me going was that discipline of, okay, in the morning, I have to write 2,000 words. Done. Okay, I can go play a game or hang out with husband or whatever. And I would do that, and it was almost, he couldn't believe that I was doing sort of remote teaching, writing, and dealing with sepsis all in the same time frame. I wish that, the Edinburgh Council didn't dock 3 weeks of my wages because I was in the hospital. But I learned that these are the things you have to go through in order to be able to write full time and to share the stories that, people have gone through and people have experienced. And I think that really matters. And that's why I love doing this podcast now, because it's a good chance to get there. What inspired you to enter the crime world with your own writing voices? Was it just the experience you were going through, or was there a particular
Well, no, I
spark?
think it was I just kind of wrote the story that I wanted to write.
Yeah.
And it was kind of, I didn't really know much about the world of publishing at all. And when I'd finished Rattle, and I had my agent, and my agent said, right, okay, we're ready to put this on submission. And it went out to kind of 5 of the biggest publishing houses, essentially. And every one of them turned it down.
Oh no.
And the feedback was pretty much unanimous, which was that the book was half crime, half horror.
Yeah.
And I had to decide kind of which way to jump.
Mm-hmm.
And, what I was trying to do was kind of be a sort of Stephen King for the crime world, I suppose. But, I realise now that, obviously I didn't pull it off with enough panache, right, when I was starting out. So I wasn't able to do that in a way that was kind of compelling enough or effective enough. And so what all these editors, I was invited in to meet a few publishers, and what they said was, you have to choose, you have to decide whether it's going to be crime or horror. And all of them recommended that I went the crime route because it's the biggest genre. And I think now I understand, because actually when you write a book, it has to be easy for the bookseller to know where it goes in the bookstore, right? Because you don't want them to be thinking, where shall we put this? And so I went for crime. And so what I was invited to do was what they call a revise and resubmit. And that's what I did. So I spent about 6 months reworking it into a full-on crime novel. And then it went out on submission again. And that time it was a different story.
And that's amazing to kind of hear. And at least they gave you the opportunity to revise it. Whereas a lot of people don't get that chance,
Not everyone has an opportunity to do that. And I think, and I'm really grateful because they saw something in my writing that they liked. And I was given a second chance, I suppose. And at the time I was so down about it. But now I realise that it was absolutely the right thing to do. And, that it made it into a much better book. And one of the editors who had encouraged me to do this kind of revise and resubmit, she ended up buying it. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And I think that's like super important too, is to have that connection with your editor in the publishing company. Like for me, I met a beautiful publisher, Melanie, in Wild Rose Press. And she came to me and she said, I love your book, but your dyslexia is making it very difficult to read it. And it was like a heartbreak almost, because I'm like, okay. And she goes, you can come back to us and with the revision and we'll probably take it. But you have to go get it edited because this is too bad. But it was like that moment, and I've had the same sort of offers from Mills and Boon and things like that. And I always feel like handicapped by the dyslexia. And I feel like a lot of publishers, they'll look at a book, and even if they love it, they don't want to deal with the dyslexia part. Or at least that's been my experience.
I think it's much tougher than it used to be. And I think, once upon a time, certainly in years gone by, an editor would spend a lot more time editing a book than they do now. And my agency very much believe that, their job. So I worked really closely with my agent editorially, and worked on my book for quite some time with her to make it into the absolute best shape it could be. And I felt like I'd already done quite a lot of editorial revisions with my agent before it even went out on submission. And I think that is a general change in the industry, is that editors edit less than they used to. That's not to say they don't edit at all, because they absolutely do. And there's some brilliant editors out there. But there's just a bit less time to do it, I think.
I think I admire your agent a lot more, because I've never had an agent that's actually worked with me. I've had some really bad luck with agents. Like, it's always been like I get the unlucky coin. But to have an agent that would sit and write, well, almost edit with you, that is
Yeah,
amazing to hear.
and and
It gives me a
and
bit of
and
hope, if nothing
well,
else.
absolutely. And I was going to say that when when I was choosing editors, I was lucky enough to have a few offers of representation.
Yeah,
And the reason that I went with Sophie Lambert, who is my editor, she's at C&W, which was formerly Conville and Walsh, which is part of Curtis Brown, is that of all the editors, of all the agents, she said to me, she said to me, it's good, but we can make it better.
yeah,
And I'm pretty gruesome, and expect a lot from you. And then I was instantly sold on that because I wanted
yeah.
to make my book the best it could be.
And I feel like that's part of all of us too. Like, we all try and do that in a way. So when you do your books, is it like a movie or a jigsaw puzzle for you?
Um, I would say it's a combination of both,
Hmm.
actually. I know that's a bit of a cop out, but my film and TV agent often says that the way that I write is quite filmic.
Yeah, I'm the
And,
same.
yeah, you can kind of see the sequences in your mind's eye. But because my plots are quite complicated,
Yeah.
and multi layered, and they can be kind of full of twists and turns, it is a little bit like piecing a jigsaw puzzle together
Hmm.
and making sure that you don't miss any pieces from that puzzle. So there isn't a great big gaping hole in the middle of your jigsaw, that you have tied up every loose end until you've
Yeah.
got a story that fits together perfectly.
Does your entertainment side kind of like pull their hair out a little bit with you? Because that was what my experience was with my executive producer. Bless him, he read my script and he went, "It's beautiful," because they had me write it, which I thought was funny. And he went, "It's beautiful, but the multi-layer thing is driving me crazy." And I'm like, "Oh,
Well,
okay,
I have never, I mean, 3 out of my books have been optioned for television so far. And for
yeah,
each of those, they invited me to write the script if I wanted to. But I haven't ever taken them up on that offer because I didn't feel experienced enough as a script writer. And I was worried that I would spend, 6 months working on a script or longer, on something that never got made,
yeah,
when really what I'm trying to do at the moment is establish my name in crime fiction. So
yeah, exactly, yeah."
and nothing of mine has got to television yet, but
I'll
we
keep
live
my
in
fingers
eternal
crossed
hope.
for you because I really want to see your stuff on TV. Because if Anne
We
Cleese can
live
do
in
it,
hope.
you can do it, you know?
Well, I think Anne Cleeves is an absolutely fascinating story. I mean, I don't know if you know the kind of backstory of Anne, but she's published by the same publisher as I am.
Yeah,
And actually, she would say she was with, I think, Pan Macmillan for 20 years or something. And
yeah,
then a television producer, was on holiday in a holiday cottage and picked up, I think it was one of the Vera books,
hmm,
that was just on the shelf in the cottage, read it and fell in love with it. And that was how the series was born. So, I suppose I'm an optimist at heart, and I think, and that's, there are opportunities around every corner. You just don't know yet,
and that's
and I
what I
think with
found. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's
and
crazy.
every new book that you write is a new opportunity. So yeah,
Yeah, and then that's what like I liked the fact that Anne Cleeves, who'd lived in Shetland for a period of time, had fallen in love with the place, and it was almost sad that she stopped writing the Shetland series after her partner died because there was
mm,
so much that she experienced and she loved in the islands, the ruralness and the fact that you can't escape the island, and there's just that kind of, if something happens, the tension in the air, you can feel it. So you walk
mm,
along Main Street and you know what's going on because the town either hums or it's full of tension. And as a writer, particularly for me growing up around the Viking culture, around all that, I kind of absorbed it and then I would put it into the page. And my mother hated having me home because the first thing I would do every morning was write. And I had to say to her so many times, "Stop, don't interrupt me. I'm going to go and do my 2,000 words. I will come and speak to you when I'm done." And she couldn't understand the discipline of that. Like, I would do
mm,
2,000 before I was going to sleep and 2,000 when I got up. And for 6 months, she watched me and she said, "You're like this crazy witch doctor." Because I would honestly forget, like, about baths. I would barely eat. She'd have to remind me to eat because I would get so into the books. And then she would literally take me to the mirror and say, "Your hair is standing in 50 directions. I think you need a shower." So I'm terrible for that. And mine's is very much like a movie, so I can pull those little threads and stuff. So I have to ask, is there a character that stayed with you the most or the longest?
I think really we sort of perhaps answered that a little bit earlier, and that is Saul,
Yeah.
because he has been with me kind of, I suppose, from quite early on. And there's just something about him that I'm drawn to. And obviously making him into a detective now, I think he's a kind of a rich seam to mine. And I think, there's so much more to come from Saul. So I think probably he is the character that has stayed with me and made the most impression on me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have one character who just does not leave me alone. So I could be working on something completely unrelated, and she'll just sort of walk through it and be like, "I want to have a conversation," or "I want the scene done." And it's so frustrating to me sometimes because I have to just minimize that book, write down the scene, and then go back to the book I was doing because she's so demanding. And I think she will never ever leave in a way because she's like part of me now. And Marie, everyone says that, like, Marie's the one character that just hangs around you. And I had that from a reader. She's like, I went away and I was reading another book and I could hear Marie's voice in the corner of her head saying, "There's a new book out. Why are you not reading my story?" And it was almost like she was haunting this poor reader. And I kind of felt bad, and I'm like, but that happens to me every day. Like, that's my character. And I always think it's fun if you have that one character that just doesn't leave you alone, even though you wish that they would go away.
I don't really have that. I mean, I know some people talk about the kind of characters running away with them, and that doesn't really happen for me. Like, I feel very firmly in control of the characters rather than the characters in control of me. But I do have moments like you where I'll be doing something completely different and an idea, or something about a quirk of their personality, or something will happen and I'll write it down because I don't want to forget that.
No, you don't. And sometimes it's
Yeah.
cracking scenes, and then sometimes you read it back and you're like, the hell did I write? Makes no sense. Is there a character you wish you could write more about? And if so, who?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like I'm writing the books that I want to write and the
Yeah.
characters that I want to write. I mean, people, I remember when I kind of, in the first two books, Rattle and the Collector, which operate really as a kind of duology,
Yeah.
there's a detective called Etta Fitzroy, and I very much enjoyed writing her. And then at the end of it, I just kind of sent her off to, America. And I remember a very kind of seasoned crime author saying to me, that is a very bold move.
Yep.
And I think it was because I just wasn't ready to write series fiction. I wanted to dip my toe into different things. I was worried that writing the kind of same characters would become, I have quite a low attention span, I suppose. I get bored very easily. And I was worried that would be what happened. And it's really only now with Saul that I feel like I want to kind of explore him further, and the publishers are really keen on that too. And so I'm ready to do that now. But I wanted to try kind of different things as well.
Do you think you'll write her? Do you think you will venture into the Americans?
I don't know. I think no, probably not. Certainly not at the moment. But never say never, I think, to anything.
I've
I
learned
think
the lesson of that one. So
yeah, and also like, you know, Rattle was my first book, and when I say that, I mean it was the first book that I'd ever written. I had a go at starting a couple of other things,
yeah.
and they'd sort of run out of steam a little bit. But so Rattle was, I consider really Rattle my first bit of, you know, full length fiction. And you know, I've learned a lot since then. You know, you learn, and
Yeah.
that's the thing about being a writer, isn't it? You become more experienced with every book.
And you learn every
And
book, yeah.
yeah, you learn with every book that you write something new.
I mean, I learned how I am so lucky because Stephanie, who's my sort of freelance editor, she said, "This book is so good. I want to do it chapter by chapter because I want to make sure that your development edit is perfection." And I had a lot of weight because there's a really big agent one to see it, and I was just like, I needed it to be perfect. I still need it to be perfect almost in my mind. But she's very good at sort of the encouragement side as well. Yes, she's brutal and she's tough, but she's really good at saying, "Hey, I love this hook," or "I love that." So I'm grateful for that almost.
Yeah, I mean,
But
and I
yeah,
think, you know, a good editor, a good agent, they're not going to tell you everything that's wrong with your book in the
no,
most brutal way, or at least what you hope is
you hope
that,
not.
you know, they like some of what you've done as
Yeah.
well. My agent, I always laugh at her because I always know when she doesn't like something, because she starts the sentence, "I wonder if, you
Yep.
know, we could do, or you could do this."
I've had those
But you know,
sentences.
I'm not precious about my writing. I'm happy to be edited, and in fact, you know, an experienced editor, an experienced agent, they are, you know, worth their weight in gold because they know the market, you know,
Yeah.
much better than I do, and they guide you, and you
Hmm.
know, and that's what you want. That's why you know, you have these talented professionals in your life, because ultimately you want the same thing, which is to make the book better.
Yeah, and then that's been my experience really because as I was saying before we came on, like this morning I had two separate editors which work on two different books, but really good friends of mine. And they dropped them on me and I was like so I'm like trying to play catch up. But yeah, I mean I've discovered things like that. Good agents is good, if you find one. But also editors are really important, even if it's freelance editors, because you're essentially working towards having that perfect novel or that perfect story. So, what techniques have you found helpful, and were there any that you wish you hadn't tried?
Um, Techniques. I think not so much a technique, I suppose, but what my agent always says when she reads my stuff, and particularly in relation to the characters who are doing wrong,
Yeah.
is, you know, why
Mm-hmm.
why are they doing that? Okay,
Yep.
it's not enough to say they do that because they are evil, or
Yep.
because, you know, they enjoy pain, or because whatever, inflicting pain or whatever. You know, it's unpicking the why, because once you have understood the motivation for your character, everything else falls into place, because then
Yeah.
what you do is you build their backstory, so you realize that, you know, this kind of twisted, brutal killer is this way because, you know, his father, you know, was neglectful and violent and
Yep.
hurtful, and he knew no different.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and so when you do that, and then you begin to feel sympathy too, or empathy at the very least.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, I always used to say that about Rattle, you know, with the serial killer and that the collector and the, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
bone collector, is that you know,
I ended up feeling sorry for
he,
him. So yeah.
well, you know, he did these awful things, but you know, he loved his wife, or you know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I'm fascinated by that. So you know, when we're talking about technique, when I am writing, and in the kind of, you know, right in the middle of writing something, I interrogate very closely why my characters are behaving in the way that I do. I suppose one of the other things that, when you're saying about things that I tried a lot in my earlier books with this kind of one sentence thing that I did for a dramatic effect, or like, one sentence chapter, or, I'm not sure how effective that is. I was playing around a lot with style. So that there's a
Alison
question
Smith
mark.
does that a lot. She's really
Yeah.
clever at that, Ali Smith.
A question, I suppose. And the other thing, which is kind of, and I'm told it's a really common thing when you start writing, is that expletives. So in my early books, right, my characters, it was absolutely peppered with swearing. And as I've kind of got more experience, I've cut almost all the swearing out. And I think that is it's a really common thing apparently that you do as a new writer, is that you swear, you use kind of expletives for emphasis. You think that, because actually I actually do swear quite a lot in my daily life, and growing up in a newspaper background, spent my formative years really on newspapers, is that every other word was a swear word, and it wasn't offensive; it was just used for emphasis.
Yep,
right?
and
that was.
Yep. I know that feeling. Yep.
But I do that much less because I think readers aren't huge fans of loads of swearing.
No, they
the
really
majority
are.
of readers. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, I spent a lot of time around wrestling, and if anyone knows backstage life in wrestling, they swear so much. It's crazy. Like, every second word, there's a language of swear words. And I apologize, my cat has made an appearance. So yeah, I mean, for me, when I started writing, I was really lucky. I knew a guy called Scott Levy who was actually Raven as a wrestler. And he was like, for goodness sake, do not take the swearing of the backstage life into this book. It doesn't belong. And so it was very difficult for me to learn to not write the swear words. But I eventually kind of like, once I'd done several editions of it, I was like, okay, I could do this without swearing. And I can understand the difficulty of it. And I ended up really appreciating the fact that he took the time to suggest that. So we're going to go into a bit about your life now. What's the first thing you do when you want to de-stress from editing and writing?
Well, I like walking. I've got 2 dogs, so I enjoy that very much. I've got quite into kind of nature photography. I'm interested in the kind of natural world, and anyone that has read all of my books will see that there's a lot about kind of insects or plants or
I had noticed that
seascapes, that kind of thing. So photography. I like cooking. I have recently got quite into, talking about wrestling, I've got quite into deadlifting and powerlifting, which I really love as the kind of physical challenge. I think I enjoy the being in competition with myself.
I went through a period of being in competition with a friend of mine called Stevie Richards, who runs a Stevie Richards Fitness. And he had this way of challenging me. And I said to him, look, dude, I'm not going to get big muscles in my arm. It doesn't work. I said, I don't know if it's the disease or what. And for 9 months straight, this poor guy worked so hard with me to try and get some muscle in my arms. And it never worked.
Nothing.
But it was fun.
I definitely, I've got a bit more definition, and my traps are much more kind of pronounced. And, and I think my trainer and I, we set ourselves, I set myself a 100K challenge to lift, which I've now done. And so we're kind of moving on to something else. But it's good. So, I like to do lots of different things.
And it's good to de-stress after writing too, because sometimes people don't realize just how much brain time and effort goes in. Like it's like running a marathon sometimes, I feel. So what hobbies would you say you enjoyed the most, and what ones do you wish you had more time to explore if you had the free time?
Hobbies, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would like to travel more. I love to travel.
So do I
love going to different places. I mean, and obviously lockdown put paid to that really. But I would, I mean, if time and circumstances and finances allowed, I would always be traveling, I think. But I mean, I love to go to new places. I think that's the thing that if I could do anything would be to travel more.
I mean, I could honestly see you buying a world cruise ticket and just riding while being on a cruise ship
I'm
for
not
a
sure
year.
cruise is my thing. I think what I would like most of all would be to go on like an epic road trip. I've done a couple of road trips with camper vans and the open road in America and New Zealand and things. And
Oh,
I
those are
think what I would
beautiful, yeah.
love would be to just, not be the one that's driving, because I hate driving, but
I can't
being a
drive, so
passenger.
I got you there. Because
Well, I would write as we were driving, or
Yeah,
I would write
I'm the
for a few
same.
hours in the morning and then enjoy where we were. I think that would be my dream life. Although I saw there was an amazing job a little while ago that was doing the rounds on Twitter, and it was a job for 6 months on an island in the Maldives to run their bookshop.
Wow, that
I
is
would
a
have quite
dream
happily
job.
applied for that if I didn't have children.
Yeah, no, that's a dream job for sure to run. Yeah, no, I would have. I never saw that. I wish I had.
Oh God, it's amazing. Yeah.
I would have applied for that in an instant. But yeah, no, I get where you're going with that. So one of the things that is assumed by readers, at least the readers I've met, is that we all like crafts. So are you a crafter? And if so, what do you do in the crafting side?
I hate to disappoint everyone, but I'm not a crafter at all. I mean, I like the idea of it. So, but what I lack is patience, and I'm not skilled or gifted in that arena at all. So my 12-year-old, she has got a sewing machine and an artist's dummy, and she would kind of run up like she's got a mannequin, and she would run up a dress or a skirt or something. Or she's made stop motion animation that was really fantastic. She paints, she draws, and I do none of these things. I mean, I am constantly in awe of people who do craft, who can crochet or who can sew or knit or create anything. But unfortunately for me, my kind of creative output is restricted to writing, really.
I mean, I laugh because the one thing that my grandmother was very convinced of was you will have ladylike attributes. That's the word she used, attributes. So because I was such a wild teenager with the dyslexia and the restlessness, she would actually sit and she would have me knitting. If I was in the house and I was sitting down, I had to do something. So I was either knitting, I was oil painting, or I was cross-stitching, or there was always something that I had to do. And I didn't find out till much later was she was actually a professional knitter from the age of 8. And she was selling her woolly jumpers as a second income for her family. And I thought, no wonder she was trying to get me to knit because of the creativity.
The thing is, I did learn to knit when I was younger. So my mum and my nana both taught me how to knit. And but I didn't really carry it on. I could knit a scarf or something.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I do now. But what I can do, like I look back and I've still got some of them, is when I was growing up and I had, I used to, do you remember those you don't because I'm much older than you, but like, baby dolls and, my Cindy and Barbie and all of those dolls. Well, my nana and her sister, they would hand make clothes for all of my dolls. And I was going through a suitcase recently and I found all of these, skirts and coats and jumpers and everything that they'd made, like these amazing dresses that they'd made for my dolls. And I am so in awe of that. And
I did the same.
Well, and what I was going to say was that recently my mum made me a patchwork blanket for my bed, and it's 81 hand knitted squares, and I love it so much because all of her love has gone into that, and her time, her effort, and I know that I'll have that blanket with me forever, and it will always represent my mum to me, and that is a really special thing. And I think when you're younger, like you're a bit dismissive of hand knitted things, like you want stuff from, I don't know, like design. I was never really into designer stuff, but you want stuff from the shops or whatever.
Yeah.
But now, like the cardigans that my mum knitted for my children when they were babies, or she'll knit me a pair of gloves or a hat, and I love it because it's something. A, it's something that I can't do, but B, it's something that represents her love.
Yeah, and I think that's like super important, because what I did during lockdown, because I couldn't write and I couldn't read, I actually made blankets for kids in care.
Oh, right. My mum did that. Well, my mum did something similar, yeah.
Yeah, and so I made up these quilts only to have the local area turn them down. So I was like, okay,
no.
what am I going to do with them? And then I found this agency in America who were pleading out for something to give these kids in lockdown and that. So I made up about 4 or 5 and I stuck them in a box. I nearly died of the shipping cost. And I sent them out, and I put their names on it. I had even knitted the letters of their names.
Aww.
And then I'd sewn them on. And it was like, I couldn't imagine being in care and then being in lockdown. So I thought, well, at least that's something that they can hold on to and say, well, somebody must love me enough to have made this for me. At least I hope that's what they got from it. But that was like the first sort of real time I picked up crafts since my nana passed. And I must admit, it was good. And I do this for all my family, is I actually make Christmas presents and birthday presents. So I'll make them a cushion or a pillowcase. I'll embroider the pillowcase with something. And I'll maybe do a quilt. And now that I've got a sewing machine, I probably will actually quilt more. But everything I make for them is got a little bit of me in it, because that sort of fight with sepsis kind of made me appreciate that almost. Like, I want to leave this little trace of me everywhere. So yeah, I ended up becoming a crafter, even though I wasn't when I started. I was very much like you and wrote all the time. So myself, I've got long-term illness that makes me slow down and appreciate the day. What makes you slow down, smell the roses, and enjoy the day?
I think, I'm pretty bad at doing that, actually. But
so
I
you
think
you didn't get COVID teaching then about slowing down?
I did. Well, I did slow down, and I think I did because we were forced to slow down. And I think what it did was made me appreciate my children. Actually, it made me, I spent a lot more time with them. We spent more time together as a family than we otherwise would have done. And so we cooked together. We had these kind of theme nights that we created. So every Wednesday night, certainly at the start of lockdown, we would have, I don't know, like a Mexican food night or Italian food or Chinese, and then we would all cook to that theme, and we would have these like lovely theme nights, and that was really like special. And at the start of the pandemic, and certainly those beautiful few weeks when it felt like you thought you were only going to be in lockdown for a few weeks, and we spent a lot of time in the garden kind of playing badminton and hanging out and just playing games and being with each other. And so I think it's just realizing that, because with the kids, it seems like 5 minutes ago that they were babies, and now they are, teens, and or one's a teen and one's almost a teen, and you just think time passes so quickly.
It does.
And to stop wishing time away, and to stop wishing for other things, but to actually appreciate what it is that you do have. And and like you see that, this year has been an eye-opener, hasn't it, when you see something like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and you realize how lucky you are to have a roof over your head and somewhere safe to sleep at night, and
to not feel as if you're under threat. Like, I couldn't imagine
frightened all the time. And so I think I do, although I find it hard to slow down, I definitely appreciate the things in my life.
So where's your favorite place to curl up during the day or at night? Is it your garden, or do you have a special cafe you go to, or a reader's nook?
I think certainly in the summer, I love sitting in the garden. So we have quite a nice sized garden. It's completely enclosed by shrubs and trees. and so the garden furniture is nice and comfortable, and we've got a big sunshade, and I love to sit there with a nice cold drink, and to just sit there and read. In the colder weather, this that I'm in now, my writing shed, which was actually literally a shed with a lawnmower and, a shovel and a trowel, and then it has been insulated, and it's got a bed in it and a chair, and it's got a heater. And, I remember being in here under a blanket, the heater was on and it was snowing outside, and I was just reading, and it was absolutely perfect.
Yeah, so, I love that.
Those two places.
When I was in Shetland, I always had this favorite place of sitting by the fire, curled up in the sofa with a blanket over me, and I would read there. And then when I moved in with Ian, the bath became my sanctuary. So 4 hours later, he'd be chapped at the door going, "Are you getting out anytime soon?" Yeah, okay.
I do always read, you were saying about reading at the end of the day as well. I do always, without fail, read at the end of the day when I get into bed, and I always read a few pages, no matter how tired I am.
And funnily enough, according to all the studies they've done, it's actually very good for your sleep. They say because it actually slows your brain waves down and actually allows you to have a deeper, more restful sleep, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
I just did it because I was trying to work on my dyslexia. So now we're at the word game part, which is the fun part. So I will say words and you say what the first thing that comes into your head.
The first thing or the first book?
You could have either. If you could
I didn't know if the word game was kind of books related to the word or just single words related to the word.
I try and do a theme. I don't usually mean to do a theme, but it kind of happens that way. So the first word is going to be kittens. So either a book or a word. I'm easy.
Okay, well, kittens makes me think of I was thinking along sort of books lines. So I was thinking that kittens makes me think of Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats.
Yes,
T.S. Eliot.
Yep. Dogs.
So if we do, I mean, I can do either, but if we do books,
let's do books because everyone else is freaks out about this part, and I end up just doing single word responses because I had actually got one author who came on, and she actually spent a whole 4 days going through her bookcases to tie the words to her books because everyone knows I send the words out so that there's not a freak out. And I admired that so much that she'd spent that 4 days finding the book. So yeah,
I didn't do that, but I did it with books rather than words, because if just random words, I am so random. Nothing I would say would make any sense. But so I sat there with the words, and I made myself do it really quickly. Just the first book that came into my head. So you might see a bit of a theme.
Yeah, well, it'll be good. It'll be good fun. So dogs.
101 Dalmatians.
I thought that too. Barking.
So it's two basically books that are essentially written for children, I think.
Yeah.
So far.
Barking we were on.
Alice in Wonderland, because all I could think of was Barking Mad.
That's actually a good one. I never thought of that. Chalk clouds.
A Cloud Atlas. David Mitchell book.
I like that. Waves lapping. I thought your book actually when I wrote that.
Well, I couldn't actually think of a book. So the first thing that popped into my head genuinely, that is one of my favourite poems, and it's called Sea Fever. Do you know it, by John Masefield?
Yeah.
And it starts, I must go down to the sea again, to the lonely sea and sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by. And I love it so much. There's such a beautiful rhythm to that is like the lapping of the waves, and that's the first thing that popped into my head.
It's a good one. Okay, we've got Heartbeat.
Twilight, because of the song by Christina Perry. Do you know what I mean?
I thought the same thing.
1,000 years.
Yeah, I honestly did. I thought the exact same thing.
So I was singing that.
Rain?
Oh, Rain. I was thinking of what I tried to think here was books that have good passages about rain. And the first one I thought of was Catcher in the Rye.
That's
And I
a
don't
really
know
good
why.
one.
I don't even think that there's tons about it, but there's a scene when he gets soaked, I think.
Yeah,
And that was all that I could think of.
that is actually what went through my head when I wrote it down. I was like, I wonder if she'll get that one. Thunder is your last one.
Well, Thunder, and I don't know if this is fair or not. I don't want to seem kind of arrogant by choosing my own work, but in When I Was 10, the opening scene is basically a young girl that gets struck by lightning. There's
I
a big
like that.
thunderstorm.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's an
and
awesome
so
choice.
and that was so I did it really quickly, like it's a proper kind of word association. So and that was
Yeah.
what I came up with. So apologies for blowing my own trumpet, I
Oh
suppose.
no, I love it. I love it because like I did it once with somebody else and I for some reason had a dance theme and I swear it was because Marie was bugging me that day and I couldn't think of anything else like in my own head of books that had nothing to do with them and I was just like, oh well. So yeah, you know, blowing your own trumpet's fine with me. And you've got you know, you're amazing enough that you can do it. So
Oh, stop.
well, before we leave, is there any books that you want to tell the readers about, other than In the Dark, that they can look forward to, or is there any news that you'd like to share?
No, I just that I'm working on my sixth book. I'm quite superstitious when I talk about my writing, and the reason for that is not because I'm precious about the idea so much, but I find that if I talk too much about my work in progress, I talk it out of my head, if that makes
Yeah,
sense,
I've done that.
and I
Yeah,
keep a lot inside. So, but what I can say is that it does feature. Saul and Blue again, who
yay!
readers have responded to so strongly, and yeah, so I'm very much enjoying them. And you know, as is with all my books, there is a thread that runs through it. So you have the detective thread, you have the victims, and then you have the perpetrators of the crime. So I'm very much enjoying writing it.
Well, that's the show, unfortunately, guys. I would love to have Fiona on again when she releases her next one, because I will be first in line to buy one. So it's been a lot of fun, and next week we're going to be actually diving into Fiona's books, and that will be just me, but I will be talking about the books in greater detail. So thank you for coming on, Fiona. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much for having me.